Dear participants, welcome to all of you and welcome to the 9th Sea Change webinar. It's the 6th in the 2012 series of webinars and the title is Large-Scale Visual Outcomes Modeling of Interventions and its Possible Application to Climate Change Monitoring and Evaluation. I see that right now we have 17 participants, and with over 100 registrations, I'm expecting some more people to log in over the next minutes. My name is Dennis Boers and I'm the Sea Change team leader. I would also like to warmly welcome our presenter of today, and that's Dr. Paul Duignan of Parker Duignan Consulting. And I will give an in-depth introduction of Mr. Duignan to you in a moment. But let me first get back to the title, Large-Scale Visual Outcomes Modeling of Interventions and its Possible Application to Climate Change M&E. Climate change interventions present problems for intervention planning, monitoring and evaluation. And this is caused by the breadth and complexity of impacts from climate change and the need for interventions to respond to a wide range of different issues. Large-scale visual outcomes modeling, pioneered by Dr. Paul Duignan, is a technique for planning, implementation, monitoring and evaluating of interventions. The technique is based on developing a visual outcomes model, also called an Outcomes DoView, which is developed according to a specific set of guidelines. Such models are visually simpler, but at the same time much larger than most traditional intervention logics. Because of the way in which they are developed, the same large-scale visual outcomes model can be used for intervention planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, evidence-based practice, risk management, outcomes-focused delegation, and for example contracting. And this webinar will overview this approach. Dr. Paul Duignan works on outcomes, evaluation and strategy, is presented on outcomescentral.org. He has developed a conceptual framework for thinking about outcomes. He also developed a practical visual approach for working with outcomes, monitoring and evaluation planning, and the world's first true visual outcomes processor software, which is called DoView. And this will be used for doing outcomes-focused strategic planning, outcomes and drawing visual DoViews, program logic models, theories of change, ends-means diagram, strategy maps, and much more, which Mr. Duignan will talk about in a moment. Sea Change, for some of the attendees this afternoon, you might already be Sea Change members and already know about us. But for those who are new to Sea Change, I would like to explain that Sea Change is a community of practice with currently 400 members that develops a culture of high-quality, rigorous M&E frameworks, approaches and methodologies for adaptive responses to climate change interventions and practices in Southeast Asia and beyond. Webinars are one way in which Sea Change is sharing knowledge to improve M&E practices related to climate change interventions. Next to webinars, and I see that I accidentally muted myself there, but what I was saying was that we support our members in speaking engagements at conferences and also support them in publishing their work if they are interested in that. For more information, I'd like to guide you to our website on www.seachangecop.org. Let me now introduce you to Mr. Paul Duignan. Paul Duignan is an expert outcome specialist and program evaluator. He has worked in many sectors and with many organizations, ranging from the IMF on the international scene through to many government ministries, departments and agencies in many sectors, and with small NGOs within local communities as well. He advises organizations on outcomes, evaluation, strategy, stakeholder processes, evidence-based practice, outcomes-focused contracting. Dr. Duignan has taught evaluation at a postgraduate level at several universities and set up postgraduate evaluation courses. He has been Senior Fulbright Scholar in Washington, D.C., is an honorary research fellow at Massey University, New Zealand, and he also runs Parker Duignan Consulting. He has developed the area of outcomes theory, an integrated user-friendly approach to outcomes evaluation called DoView planning, and he has been involved in the development of DoView outcomes and evaluation software. His work can be found on the earlier mentioned outcomescentral.org, and you also see his Twitter feed here, which you can link to if you want to be kept in touch and updated on what he's doing. A little bit of webinar logistics for this session. The webinar presentation will take 30 to 35 minutes, after which there will be time for questions and answers. You can type your questions in the question field in the software, after which we will present the questions to our presenter. Or you can raise your hand and ask the question verbally. On the next slide I will show you where you will find the question field and the hand raising buttons. Any questions that have not been answered during the 30-minute Q&A session will be answered offline and published on our website together with a recording of this webinar. During the question and answering time, please click on the raise hand icon if you want to ask a question verbally. Another issue, a little bit simpler, is just to type your question in the question window. What we do is that we collect all the questions, and quite often a number of people have the same questions, and then we will ask them to Mr. Duignan.
Great, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dennis, for that introduction. My name is Paul Duignan. I am talking to you from New Zealand at the moment, so a long way away from where a number of you are located. And what I'm going to do in the relatively short time of this webinar now is to talk to you about large-scale visual outcomes modelling of interventions and its possible application to climate change. Now, there's a great deal I could say about this methodology and approach, but I will only be able to give you a short introduction to it in this webinar, but I will refer you to reference material and websites where you can go and look further if you are interested in exploring this way of working. And I understand up on the Sea Change site there will be a page with this webinar recorded, and it will have resources on that site also, which you can use if you are interested in applying this methodology. What we're talking about here is a new way of looking at planning, which can be applied to any topic, and obviously you're interested in applying it to climate change. And the main aspect of what we're talking about is that we're moving away from the traditional approach, which was to write long documents in regard to our planning and our monitoring and our evaluation and the strategic planning of projects. The traditional approach has been long narrative written documents and many documents with tables in them, which people often find quite hard to access and work with. And so what we're trying to do is to develop a new visual approach, which we find stakeholders find a lot easier in their work. Now, just several points about this new approach, which uses these large-scale visual diagrams, which are called Outcomes DoViews within our particular approach, and they can be used both for strategy, for monitoring, and evaluation planning. So they're an integrated approach, and they can be used for all those different aspects. It's an easy approach. It doesn't rely on what we call wordsmithing text-based strategic plans and monitoring and evaluation plans. It relies entirely on using a visual approach. It's very powerful. I'll show you in a moment within the webinar how you can use it within strategic planning for what's called line of sight alignment analysis. Clients and stakeholders find this approach very appealing because it's more accessible. They can very, very quickly look at a visual model and come to understand what's happening in a program and what you're measuring and what you're going to evaluate. Really importantly, a lot of our work separates the strategic thinking, the planning about either strategy or evaluation and monitoring. It separates that from the way we document that thinking. So normally we have a meeting and we decide, let's say, on an evaluation plan for a climate change project, and then someone will go away and write up minutes of that meeting and write a report from that meeting. And that would be separate from the actual strategic thinking that was taking place in the meeting. What we're trying to do with this new approach is we're trying to help people not have separate documentation from their planning processes, but actually to work with a visual model in the meeting room, which is the same model that we use to document the planning process. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And then this process is completely outcomes focused, because in the modern world we need to be outcomes focused. If we're not outcomes focused, then we're not going to get funding for our projects, or they will not be credible to our stakeholders. This approach is much more agile. The problem of the world we're living in today is that things can change very, very fast, as we know. Almost overnight the situation can change, and we have to be able to adjust our strategic plans, our monitoring and evaluation plans very, very quickly. If we do it in using a written approach, we find that we have to go back and amend long paragraphs of text because something has changed in our planning. If we use a visual approach, it's much more agile. We find that we can immediately change what we've done just by changing the wording of a box or putting a different indicator visually beneath the box. We're in a position where we can change our strategy very, very quickly. The major problem from the psychological point of view with strategic planning and monitoring and evaluation planning, and why people find it so hard and difficult, is what's called cognitive load. Now, cognitive load is just a complicated word for how hard it is for you to think about a subject and overview it and analyze it. Text-based planning, whether it be strategic planning, monitoring or evaluation planning, has a very high cognitive load. It's difficult to access text-based planning documentation. The visual-based planning has a lower cognitive load. People can access it a lot easier. And so therefore, in the modern world where we have to do things fast, where people's attention spans are shorter, then we need an approach which is similar. The approach integrates strategic planning, monitoring and evaluation into the one approach. Sometimes people talk, when I was working in South Africa a little while ago doing a project for UNFPA, they were talking about putting the P back into M&E. Putting the P back into M&E. And what they meant was putting the planning back into monitoring and evaluation, because they saw that monitoring and evaluation can't stand on its own. It should be integrated with strategic planning, because often if you wait just for the monitoring and evaluation, it's too late. You should have done the planning properly. This DoView visual strategy monitoring and evaluation planning is an integrated approach which integrates those three aspects into the same approach by using a DoView visual model, which is this large-scale model, to underline our planning and implementation. So there's a 5-step process involved here. The first step is to build a model of the program which you're running, and we call that a Outcomes DoView. It's a particular type of logic model or theory of change which is drawn according to a set of rules to make it fit for purpose for this overall planning process. So it is a type of intervention logic, a type of logic model, a type of log frame, but it is one drawn according to a particular set of rules to make sure it will be able to do the work we need it to do when we get it to do our integrated planning, monitoring and evaluation. The second step is to show what we call line of sight alignment, and at this stage we're making sure that the projects within the project and the program are focused in on priorities. And this can be part of strategic planning, but it's also a part of, if we are doing, say, formative evaluation of a program, evaluating whether the program is well formed and heading in the right direction. We would want to know that the projects were aligned with the priorities of that program. The third aspect is where we move measurement in, and we're talking here about measurement, which is really indicator work, monitoring work, which is about measurement, routine measurement and accountabilities. The fourth step in the process is evaluating success, which is more one-off evaluation activity, which is the other side of the monitoring and evaluation coin. And then lastly, we're talking about dashboarding our results onto our Outcomes DoView, which, if you remember, is simply a large-scale type of logic model. If we've got those five steps, we can then combine them in various ways when we're looking at different organizational and program processes. So if we're doing strategic planning and priority setting, we do the first step and the second, which was building the visual model, and then secondly using it for prioritization and looking for alignment. If we're doing program monitoring, then we build the model, we measure, and then we report back, we dashboard. If we're doing program evaluation, we measure, we do evaluation and we report back and dashboard. If we're doing risk management, we measure, so we build the model, and then we do the prioritization and the alignment, particularly focusing on whether we are mitigating the risks in our planning processes. If we're doing evidence-based practice, we make sure that our base visual model, our Outcomes DoView, we make sure it is evidentially based. And if we're doing outcomes-focused contracting and delegation, we do the model building, the alignment, the measurement typically, and the dashboarding, reporting back. So the great thing about this approach is it integrates those organizational or program planning processes, which in the past have sometimes been seen as separate activities. It integrates more into the one integrated process, and as I said, puts the P back into M&E, the planning back into monitoring and evaluation. And the entire approach is built around this idea of building a large-scale visual model of what you're doing in a program. So let's turn to an example of this so I can just talk you through this briefly. So what I've done is I went up to the Sea Change site and I obtained there's a report up there which is the IPCC SREX report, which is looking, there's a number of these, there was a big report and there's a number of different sector reports. I just looked at the water, what we might call the water systems report, and this talked about some of the issues around water management and the impact of climate change on water management. I also looked at another one which was about ecosystem services, and this same approach would apply to ecosystem services, to water, etc. Now, the idea here is that we build, as I said, a logic model, and there's just several principles about the type of logic model we'll build. Later on I'll show you the resources for where you can see up on the DoView website where you can see how we go about building these models. But I just want to say 2 points to start with. One is we try and keep the models very simple. We think we should be thinking about a communication device. Many people draw visual logic models and they make them so complicated that other people can't understand them. They look like engineering diagrams, and often normal stakeholders are scared to really interact with those diagrams. That's the first point. And the second point is we need a way of making these models as large as they need to be, because the problem in the past has been that we have limited these models to a single page. And if we limit the models to a single page, we often just find we run out of room. So that's this idea that we're talking about large-scale models, which can be as big as they need to be. And it's at that point that we really need a piece of software which enables us to build these large models and work with them in real time. And the particular piece of software I've got here is one that I've been involved in developing, which is called DoView Outcomes and Evaluation Software. But we should distinguish, that's one, DoView is a piece of software for doing this type of work. I think in the future there will be other similar types of software. You can call it an outcomes processor. But the principles I'm talking about are general, and I'm showing you them applied in the case of DoView software that I'm involved in, but the principles are more broad than just this particular piece of software. So what I've done is I've just, as an illustrative example, I've talked about a National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. Just imagine that in some country there was set up a National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. It may not be that this happens exactly like this in countries that may be more integrated with the General Climate Change Office or Ministry for the Environment. However, just to illustrate this, just imagine there is something called the National Water System and Climate Change Office. And I'm talking here at planning at a national level, but exactly the same DoView planning process can apply to small-scale projects right down to the very local level, but I'm just showing you at the national level. So what we're trying to get to is reduced impact on water systems from climate change within that country. So on the right-hand side of the model we have where we're trying to get to, if we think of it as a roadmap, and then we have better water-related systems, moving to the left, better water system research and information collection, water systems risks shared and transferred better, and better water system frameworks and planning, and a well-run National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. Let's just go down to look at that one there for a minute, which is the well-run National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. What we've got in the model there, we start from the left-hand side, an appropriate mandate for the office, clear about outcomes and how you're going to achieve them, and good strategic and business planning, appropriate governance structure. And see how we move through that, good management, financial, HR, ICT, right across here to good reports, policy recommendations, a set coordination, good reputation, and satisfied funders, satisfied stakeholders, and financially responsible. So what we've got there is a model about how the office is run, which is very low level. We look at that in terms of even below outputs, if we thought traditionally. And then we've got, we're talking here about better water system framework and planning, and this talks about a better multi-sector national water policy framework, and then decentralisation of water resource management, improved institutional arrangements and negotiation systems for water allocation and management, enhanced national preparedness and evacuation plans for water-related risks, and effective planning for alternative livelihoods as a consequence of water system disruption. And then we've got research, and better water system research and information collection here. Now, this comes from, don't worry about those projects along the bottom, I'll show you those in a minute, but as appropriate data collection standards, better data collection infrastructure, better analysis of data collected, better dissemination of research and information on water, better surveillance, prediction, warning and emergency response systems, improved weather, climate, hydrological and water quality forecasts, better disease and vector control detection systems. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through any more of those levels, but I just want to make the point, because I've only got limited time, I want to make the point we could have as many levels as we like within this approach, as many levels as we like. So the models can be large. This is this idea of having large scale models to encompass whatever it is we're doing in the program. So if we just look very quickly at how we could use this, if thinking of our 5 steps of planning, the first thing we can do is build a model. The second thing we can do is to think in terms of priorities. So it may be that we say that data collection standards is an A priority, and better data collection infrastructure may not be a priority. Better data analysis may or may not be a priority. We'll just say this, what I'm doing is typing BAU for business as usual. And it may be that there is an issue in regard to dissemination of reports, research and information about water. Let's just say that that's the pattern of priority setting, and the main point I want to make here is once you've built this visual outcomes DoView, a planning group as part of strategic planning could go through and prioritize all of the boxes within the model, just like I've done now on a very small number of boxes, but they could use the visual model to prioritize what it is that they're planning to do in the next period going forward. Now, the idea of using this for visual planning is that we can then think in terms of a set of projects. And so I've got here a water data collection standards project. So we can see how this project here maps up onto the appropriate data, the appropriate data collection standards up here on this part of the diagram here. So we have, it's an A priority, and we have a project which is mapping up onto that. A national water plan may well have something in it also which is about data collection infrastructure. And a new national water rights negotiation framework may not be relevant to this page within the model, but it could be relevant to other pages within the model. And a waterborne disease emergency response page, again, wouldn't be particularly relevant to this particular page, but it could be, as you can imagine, relevant to other pages within the model. Now, what we do then within DoView, it's a very, very simple model that I'm showing you here, is we can see, what I've done then is I've turned on count links, and I'm seeing the number of projects which map up onto each part of the model above. Now, in a real example, this would be way more than just a couple of projects mapping onto a couple of boxes. We can handle within a DoView software situation where you have many, many projects mapping up, but I just wanted you to be able to see this as an example. The problem here we have is what we call lack of line of sight, because better dissemination of research and information on water, this box here, doesn't have a project mapping on it at the moment. See, this box does. There's one project mapping onto that, one project mapping onto that, but there's no project mapping up here onto better dissemination of research information on water. So therefore, we would probably need to develop another project here to map up onto that, which could be a dissemination project, we'll just call it. And if we were looking for line of sight, we would map that up onto that part of the model to show that we've got line of sight. Now, if you look at the examples I'll give you at the end on the website, you'll see we can do this on a much larger scale, and within the DoView software we can connect project boxes across the different pages within the software. I'm not going to show you how to do that in this webinar, but this approach is very scalable up to massive project situations where you have many, many projects focusing in on a model. Now, moving now to how we can use this for planning, for measurement. What we've done here is, I'll just turn off those links. What we've done here is we've started to put measurement in here. So this is a measurement which is the percent of standards completed, appropriate data collection standards, the percentage of standards completed. You can see here we're measuring the number of standards completed by simply putting that measure next to the relevant box. Or here we have another one about better data analysis, peer review ratings of research reports produced by the National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. And here we have better dissemination of research and information on water. We have those two were indicators, or monitoring indicators. Here we have an evaluation question. Has the work of the Water Systems and Climate Change Office led to increased dissemination of information about water? So what we can do then is then basically set up a series of monitoring and evaluation projects within, this should actually be project 1, no sorry, that's project 2, within our based on our visual model or our Outcomes DoView. So what we have here is a description of what has been measured here underneath. Sorry, the title is just wrong. I just have to change that. So this is actually our first monitoring evaluation project, which is about administrative data. So the indicators that are being measured here are the percent of standards completed and peer review ratings of research reports produced by the National Water Council or by the the Climate Change Office. Now the thing about this is that we are able to immediately see this measure, if percentage standards completed. We can go back into the model and we can see where that is represented in the model and where that measure lives. So we're in a situation where we can click through a model and we can see why we're measuring what we're measuring and how that relates to the thing that we're trying to change. The same with peer review ratings of research reports produced by the National Water Council or by the Climate Change Office. We can, if we wish, go back and find exactly where that measurement lies, which was under better analysis of data collected. Now, the same applies if we look at an evaluation question, and here we're talking about an evaluation project which has been set up. So I've just got my name of my projects around the wrong way. It's called Key Informant Interviews. Now this is an evaluation project. A minute ago we had a monitoring project, now I've got an evaluation project, and this shows the evaluation questions being measured, and these questions are: first, has the work of the Water Systems and Climate Change Office led to increased dissemination of information about water issues? And is the office collaborating well with other agencies? It talks about the method, key informant telephone interviews of 15 key informers from the water sector, the timing of that study, and it could have the cost of the study. And just within the DoView software, this is all just free-form text put in any way that you like and whatever headings that you like. Now again, as with the indicators, if I click on that, that'll take me back to find where that question is located. Has the work of the Water Systems and Climate Change Office led to increased dissemination of information about water issues? And the same if we go and look on another page, is the office collaborating well with other agencies? This is more a formative evaluation question, which is located within this well-run National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. Is the office collaborating well with other agencies here? And when we click on that, it takes us out to the evaluation project, which is going to answer an evaluation question. Now the whole point of this is that normally when we do an evaluation plan, it's just a long text-based document which is not easy to access in this way. Whereas once we're in this environment where we can click and move between the evaluation question, the evaluation project, the indicator, the monitoring project, we can fully document our evaluation planning all within this visual format based on the visual plan, visual outcomes model that we have of the project. And we've recently done this in another sector. There's the program called Health Information for All. We developed a visual evaluation plan for it. It's a global program to make sure that health professionals and health workers have the information they need to treat people when they need to treat them. We developed a DoView model. We developed a visual evaluation plan, not a written narrative traditional evaluation plan. We sent that to the Rockefeller Foundation, and it financed the evaluation of Health Information for All just on the basis of the DoView visual plan and a very short Word document, about 3 pages on the front of that visual plan. So what this shows is that funders can use this new approach, which is far more efficient, because this type of visual evaluation plan can be built in about half the time it takes to write a long narrative evaluation plan. The main point is that funders are able to interested in using this type of evaluation planning because it's much more accessible. They can immediately see the evaluation questions, see the evaluation projects, and they can click and move between them. And then the last aspect, so what I've covered so far is the first 4 parts of the process: building the Outcomes DoView, secondly using it for line of sight, thirdly using it for monitoring of indicators, and fourthly for evaluation planning. And I just wanted to show you the 5th step where we use it for reporting back results. And so here we have the percent of standards completed. 90% of standards are completed. Peer review ratings of research reports produced by the National Water Systems and Climate Change Office. 95% of reports rated very good or good by peer reviewers. And has the work of the Water Systems and Climate Change Office led to increased dissemination of information about water issues? And then the results of key informant interviews show that the majority of key informants believe the office has made a difference to dissemination. Now the point about this last thing, this dashboard or reporting back, is that if we use that in the next round of strategic planning, we may, for instance, decide for the next year that this may change, but it may be a C priority, or it may not be a priority at all, because we now have 90% of standards completed. We may find here that this better data analysis is no longer a priority because 95% of reports are rated good or very good. But we may think that something like this, the infrastructure development, may become an A priority, and then we would think about how we would measure that, whether we would evaluate that, and that would fold into the next term of planning going forward. So really what we've illustrated here in this very brief period of time is the idea of putting the P back into M&E. So putting planning back into monitoring and evaluation, and doing that against a visual model, and those visual models have to be able to be as large as they need to be. Now, the same process can be used if you're thinking about planning for a sector, so I won't talk about that today because I don't have enough time, but exactly the same process of when I was mapping those projects up onto the model, those projects could be run by different organisations within the sector, and I'll put some links up on the Sea Change page about this webinar, which will show you where you can go away and see how that can be done. So just to move on before we move into question time to some resources, you'll be able to find, well, first of all, the DoView model, which is created in DoView software, is actually up on the web, and I'll show you that in a moment. DoView visual planning, if you look at, mainly if you look on the DoView website, delegation plan, you'll be able to find how to do that. Using it for evaluation planning, up on delegation plan evaluation.html. How to actually draw these models, delegation plan draw HTML. We have two LinkedIn communities of practice, one about the software and one about the overall planning process if you're on LinkedIn. And there's another website, Outcomes Central, where there's my work and links to Twitter, etc. And if you're interested in the software, you can get it from delegation.com. Just one last point about the software is that if international development projects can't afford the software, then free copies can be made available to them under a thing called the DoView donor scheme. So just do remember that if international development projects can't afford it, they can get it for free. Just the last thing I want to show you before we move to questions is this web page version of the model, which is here. So this is now not within, everything I showed you so far was within DoView software, but this is actually now up on the internet. And so it doesn't require DoView software. And to look at it, and if any of you went now or while we're talking to outcomesmodels.org/models climate change water 103.html, you would be able to click through this. So when we click on that, we can click through the visual model. So the whole point about this is that we can use it. Here we're moving through the model in exactly the way I did within the software. But the point about this is that you can do that from the website if you go to that URL I referred you to at the top of the page there. And then the last point about that is if, and in fact any of you can do this now, and once this webinar is finished, if you download a copy of DoView software, the trial version there for 30 days, and if you click on this, download the DoView file of this model, you immediately will have that model. If DoView is installed on your PC or your Mac, this model that I've got here will open, and you'll be able to edit it and immediately play around with it. So you can immediately play around with this model after the webinar if you wish by just going to outcomesmodels.org, models climate change water 103.html, and you could then download DoView and then start playing around with it. Alright, so I will return to that page that talked about the resources. That's just where you can find the web page version of the model, and I'll hand over back. Do I hand over back to you, Dennis, to conduct the questions?
Paul, maybe best to keep the screen yourself, and I'll just ask the questions, because it might be that you want to show things on your screen based on these questions. Let me first of all thank you very much for this very clear basically an introduction into what DoView can do with respect to outcomes mapping and modeling for climate change related M&E as well. Very interesting, and I think you already started to answer a question in the end by showing us the online version, because I got a question from Richard Smith who says, well, when I send this to my donor, how can they play with it? And basically, I think you already answered this question by showing that you can just give a web link and then people can access it. Is that access, for example, protected with a password or anything like that?
Well, what it is that the DoView software produces a web page version, which you then put on the internet. So if you have an internet technician or IT person, they could put it up on your website behind a password. But what people often do is use a thing called Dropbox, which is a free internet service. You just publish it to the public file of your Dropbox, and then you would just send that link to your funder, and they would be able to look at it on Dropbox just as a public URL. So the answer is, you could, if you are an organisation, they would normally be able to put it behind a password if you like. But if you're just wanting to work very quickly, you could publish it using Dropbox, if that makes sense. So they can, when people look at the web page version, they cannot do everything that they can within the DoView file, but they can do most of the things. So it's an ideal way for people to click through and look at the model. You can also send it as a PDF. You can very quickly, just within a second, make a PDF, or you can cut and paste the pages into Word if you like. Although we suggest you just make a PDF of it. So there's various ways of communicating it to funders or others.
Okay, that's handy, and I'm guessing that donors can also download the 30-day trial to open the files that are being sent to them.
Absolutely, it's just on the bottom of that page that we were. If anyone can click on that and download the 30-day trial, and then download the DoView files to open the DoView files, so they could easily use that. They can basically just get hold of DoView and start looking at it within DoView if they wish. Anyone in the world at any time can.
Okay, very handy. Another question I had was that there are different evaluation approaches or different evaluation philosophies. How does DoView work with different approaches? For example, empowerment evaluation or stakeholder-based evaluation. How would that then show in DoView?
Yes, well, Dennis, in developing this approach, I was very keen to not just make it work for one type of evaluation. So really it doesn't limit your approach to any one type of evaluation. It just has the idea of an evaluation question, or in fact in the DoView software you just insert what's called a question, and so it could actually be a research question, whatever. But that question can be put from an empowerment perspective, a stakeholder perspective, or any other perspective that people have within evaluation. Theory, obviously, is kind of a theory of change evaluation approach. Also, so we've just left it completely general and generic, so that anyone can. We didn't want to limit the approach in any way to a particular style of evaluation, and just with the idea that every evaluation approach has the idea of an evaluation question, which you can use to formulate. And because we provide this rich modelling environment where you can model whatever you like, if you're doing an empowerment evaluation, as David Federman would do, and he's, if you look up on this blog recently, we've been doing a little bit of work with him about using DoView for empowerment evaluation. You could just build a whole page or many pages about the empowerment aspect of the evaluation, about how people are being empowered, because our modelling approach doesn't really limit itself in any way. It just allows you to visually model whatever aspect that you like. Just one last point about that. You'll notice that in these models, these large-scale models, I suggest that we really, a lot of people in their models, they have a lot of different layers within their models. They have like inputs, outputs, intermediate outcomes, final outcomes. We don't really bother about too much of that because we think often it confuses the reader. There's nothing wrong with putting a heading on the right-hand side, final outcomes, and something on the left-hand side, but we don't slavishly limit our models to all of those headings that people often put in them. We don't really think you need to do that. And when you look at the references about drawing DoView, you'll see how you can go about it without having to got too hung up about these different headings. That makes them simple. That means you can model at any level, basically.
What I see in the example that you use here, and you of course are using a simplified example because we have 30-40 minutes here. But how would a model look with feedback loops? Because feedback loops are an intrinsic part of complex systems, and especially in climate change mitigation and adaptation intervention, you will see a lot of feedback loops. And I was wondering if you would have an example which has feedback loops in it, not necessarily an example from climate change, but one where you can explain a little bit how that would work in DoView. And that's, by the way, a question from Rick Davies.
Yes, hi Rick. Well, we were very interested, when I was involved in developing DoView, one of the things I insisted on was that we should be able to represent a feedback loop. And so within DoView, it does let you do this. So what I'm doing now is drawing, just imagine this probably isn't a feedback loop, but just I'm drawing a line there connecting those two there. So this means, and the way this works, I'll just turn it to a different view from left to right. That's that line within DoView. When I click on that, it shows that that's the top of the arrow, so this box is causing that box to occur. But also you can draw a line back showing that this box is actually making that box occur. Within DoView we do a right mouse click, it shows what it's making happen and what it's resulted. So that's actually representing a feedback loop. We could, if we wish, separate out these two. So there's no problem with representing a feedback loop, and you could, to your heart's content, represent as many feedback loops as you like within the DoView diagram. And I was very insistent that was built into a feature of the software because, as people say, there are many feedback loops. However, at the moment we tend to try and keep our diagrams very simple, and if you look at the ones I've got here, we're just suggesting at the moment we're just really broadly saying that there's a flow from left to right, and that because we want to respect complexity in this way of drawing the diagrams, that there could be a lot of interactions between these boxes within the model, and we see the analysis of those interactions as probably often a secondary stage. We say some evaluators take this, say we just take this model away, and they could explore the various relationships within that model and all the feedback loops, and they can model all that visually within DoView with lines and arrows, no problem at all. But my only point I make at the moment is we try and we're just saying in the diagrams there's a general left to right drift. There could be all sorts of feedback loops and lots of connections. But at this stage we're trying to really just introduce people to modelling. We don't want to kind of scare them off with too much complexity. We want to respect that complexity. And in fact, paradoxically, that's one of the reasons I don't put all the lines and arrows in, because you often find that you can put them in one place and you can't put them in the other because you haven't figured out where they all are. And so we're really trying to offer a high level of respect for complexity but still model simply as part of an ongoing journey. So I suppose I think ultimately, just to talk to Rick, I think ultimately you want to be able to model all of this complexity, but we see ourselves just taking baby steps, sort of the beginning, with stakeholders particularly. We're on the beginning of a journey towards modelling complexity, and I think in the future we'll have a lot better tools for modelling complexity, but we're not rushing to get there in an unrealistic time frame where we actually put people off because our model's too complex. So that's actually the answer to this. Yeah, so really, yeah.
I'm going to pick two questions together of Lorraine Breen, and she asks, is it possible to save older versions and then show basically the program life cycle? That's the first question, and my feeling is that you're going to say that you basically keep on working in the same version from the moment you design it, and that history will be in that version. And the second question is, how do you present this in a PowerPoint presentation? For example, if you present it to a board or to grantees.
Yes, so the first question, we tend to have it as a living document, so we change it over time. But there's no automatic versioning within DoView at the moment like you might have in some pieces of software where you could go back and back. But what we normally do is just keep a snapshot of the model, just keep it by versioning. We just save a new copy of the model.
Okay.
You could actually within DoView have it as a subdirectory, so you can document every stage you go along as much as you like. So it's not like because it's standalone software, it's not like a web system that maybe the versions disappear or something on it. You can always keep as many as you like. And the next one is about PowerPoint. Yes, where you can cut and paste any diagram into PowerPoint. But we do suggest, everything I've shown you today is actually within DoView software. And that's the reason we designed it. It is actually, while it's a simple modeling tool, it's really a simple presentation tool. And the great power of doing presenting within DoView means you can immediately start changing the diagram. Because what we find is inevitably someone looks at the diagram and says, well, that box shouldn't be there. And if you actually do it live within DoView, one of the purposes of building DoView was to make a tool, and why it's so simple to use, a tool that you could use in real time with a group. It's really a discussion tool. It's really for strategic discussions and planning. And if you cut and paste it into PowerPoint, which you can, you lose some of the power of it. Like it's not so easy to click, which is this drill down phenomenon, which I think I'm illustrating now on the screen. So and if someone, say we're on this one and you're talking to a board and someone says, I think that box should be to the left of that box, you immediately can actually do that. Or elaborate, or someone says, I want to drill down under that box. You can immediately drill down and then you can start talking to them. So really what we're suggesting, well, there's no problem with using PowerPoint, we really would encourage people just to get into the DoView modeling, because that's the power of it. There's a very agile modeling in real time with people as they discuss things, rather than, again, separating presentation mode from an analysis mode. We're really just trying to provide a new way of doing things where we are both analysing and documenting at exactly the same time.
I see that answered the question. I get an excellent from Lorraine on this one. I will take two other questions together again, and I quite get a lot of positive feedback on this software. People say it seems a very efficient and powerful approach for PM&E. And the two questions I want to take together is, the first one is, how do you put assumptions in it? And the second one is, are there situations in which this approach and software is not suitable or would have limited utility?
Yes, great, thanks. Well, the first thing about assumptions, I've thought about this a lot, and I think you can always put, you should, as much as possible, and I think almost entirely, you can visually model your assumptions into the model. So whatever, and this all comes back to what we think of as permissible within what we might call an outcomes model. And if you go to a website which is called outcomestheory.org, where I was on a Fulbright in the US a while ago, and I developed up a whole area which is called outcomes theory, and within that I analysed things like what can't we put into a model. And I think there's no reason why you can't visually model assumptions. So I would just, because an assumption is really something which you don't control but you want to happen. So maybe say not a global financial crash. Now that could be an assumption, but see how we can just put that in there. So I would just put all my assumptions into the model. However, if people, another approach, if people like you can actually document these models fully within DoView. There's a table down here, so within the notes function you could write the assumptions within the notes function, or you could put a notes on just a blank page within DoView if you wish. But my tendency is to try and model everything. Assumptions, also risks. I think risks should be written in the positive and put into models. So you model. So there's some ways of doing logic models. So in the past, people would have a one-page model and then big tables of assumptions. Personally, I think that's a mistake, mainly because we didn't have the technology to model large-scale outcomes models. Put everything into your model, and then you are actually working with the dynamics of the model of the world and its complexity there in front of you visually, and the assumptions are actually encapsulated in the visual model. And then where wouldn't it work was the second part of that question. I haven't thought a lot about that. I think it can work in a lot of situations. I think it doesn't do it doesn't do everything. So there's going to still be almost certainly some sorts of documentation. It's not a complex. It's in no way a complex modelling tool. If you want to model, it does do the feedback loop thing I talked about, but it doesn't it doesn't do highly complex modelling. It doesn't have a mathematical basis to the modelling. So I think there's a lot of areas where you may want to do more complex modelling or simulations, etc. And DoView is not the tool for that. DoView is simply, think of it as a Swiss Army knife, a very simple tool for working in real time about strategy, monitoring, evaluation questions. But there are much more complex modelling where I would go to other modelling tools. I suppose that's the main place where I wouldn't see it adding value, but for the general strategy discussion is where it's designed to add value.
Thank you for that one. Another question from Richard Smith, which is, you gave an example of a Rockefeller Foundation where you sent a proposal that was made with DoView. Do you know of any other funders that are happy to receive such models instead of a log frame or in addition to a log frame?
I don't at the moment. I suspect there are some. DoView is used in 47 countries, so probably are people out there doing that or starting to do that. But I don't, Richard, have another actual example at the moment of where people are doing that. But what I think some people are doing is they may put in a traditional funding proposal and then they might attach a DoView model to the back of that. So they're really saying slowly an educated process. What I do know is that we're talking to someone on the board a little while ago, and we presented the DoView model, and they said this is the most accessible evaluation planning we've ever seen. So I think naturally, if you can get in front of people, it does appeal to people at boards because they feel it's quite analytical and they can quickly look into what's happening.
I have a last question. If other people have questions, you can still write them right now. If I get them before the next question is answered, I will ask them as well. And this next question is, of course, the big question that's on everyone's mind, and that is from Maita Villafane: how much does it cost? And is it linked to a number of users?
Right, well, it's basically single use. So it costs $199 US for a normal use for a government or corporation, $199 US for each person who uses it. But then the more people who use it, the price gets lower, then that discounts down quite a lot. If a lot of people use it, there can be site licenses if a whole organisation wants to buy it. However, for small community groups, it only costs $99 US. So they just need to contact DoView and describe how they're a small community group. We're trying to keep it affordable for such groups. And this is full lifetime licenses that just go on forever. It's not for a year or anything. That'll go on continuously. And then lastly, if any international development project cannot afford it, they just need to write to DoView. And for every copy of DoView sold, a copy is made available free to an international development project. So at that level, at least the international development project, there shouldn't be any impediment for small projects in developing countries who can't afford it to use it. It's completely free. They'll just get a permanent license for it. That's on the DoView page called the DoView Donor Scheme on the DoView website.
That's a very nice setup you have organized there, with making one available to people who can't pay for it for every one that you sell. I didn't get any other questions, and I think that answered the last one. I'll give it a few more seconds if someone wants to say something.
While they're doing that, Dennis.
Yeah.
Are you there, Dennis? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Just one thing is because at the moment DoView is still a PC or Mac based product rather than a web-based product. In a number of years, everything will go off into the internet, into the cloud. But at the moment, we think what we're trying to do, because it's a discussion tool, people have to use it in every room in which they're discussing strategy, and not everywhere is connected to the internet yet. And so there's advantages in having this, that you can put it up onto web, as we said. But the main point is that a new version of DoView is coming out called a corporate version, which will enable, if I have a file a DoView file, and if I had 3 departments, I can then send that file to those departments, and they can separately work on their departmental level within the DoView file, send the file back to me, and I can sync just their folder back up into the file. So if you had a distributed setting where a number of people are working on the same project, with this new version, it should come out in a month or so, they will be able to work and we'll be able to sync it back into the file using this new DoView corporate version, which really is the main advantage of a web-based, cloud-based system. But DoView, the PC, Mac, computer version of DoView will allow syncing in a later version, which is coming out soon. So that's just where people are collaborating with others on a large project.
Two more questions. The first one is about DoView. Well, they are both about DoView, but the first one is about the use of DoView. To the right bottom, there are various lights that show the status. And Maita would like to know what these lights do, if they automatically are set when you pass a certain date, or how does it work?
Well, they're just very simple traffic lights. So they can, again, we're just trying to keep DoView very generic and very simple, so you can use them anywhere, any way that you like, but that often people use them to dashboard. So the green light means that box has been achieved, and the orange light means some more work needs to be done, and the red light that there are problems, and we've got halfway in between those two. So they're just, all they are is traffic lighting, and they can be whatever meaning you put on that you like.
Okay. And just to check, Henk Gilhuis asks, did I get it well that a document drawn up in DoView is readable and navigatable without having DoView installed? And he asked that because it's important for sharing the results.
Yes, well, you can produce a PDF. So the PDF isn't navigable, but it is a PDF that you can print out the entire DoView as a PDF. He could see that immediately if he went to the web page version, and it says download the printable PDF file of this model. The other way is to do the web page version, which you can freely publish using Dropbox, which is navigable. So I'm now just in the web page version, so I don't have DoView. So if anyone now goes to outcomesmodels.org, models climate change 103.html, they will be able to navigate. He can navigate through that and see how it is navigable. So yes, so the PDF is not navigable, but the web page version is navigable, and the DoView version is obviously navigable.
Very clear. And that is immediately the last answer to the last question. Thank you very much, Paul, for this very interesting and very clear example of how to use DoView in the outcomes modeling and mapping of a climate change related intervention. Very nice having you here. The recording of the webinar will be online tomorrow or the day after, and with that all the links will be provided as well to DoView.
Just one last thing, Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Am I still live?
Yes.
We do have a community of practice. For anyone who's on LinkedIn, we'd love you to come up to the community of practice. You can get it at tinyurl.com/DoView planning LN. And we'd love to, if you've got any questions at all, come up there, ask them, and we can discuss. Lots of people up there discussing aspects of using the DoView visual planning evaluation approach. We'd love to see you up there. And if in the resources, I'll also give you my Twitter feed, etc. And if anyone just wants to email me, my email is paul@parkerduignan.com.
Thank you. Very clear. I'll also make sure that this presentation will be added to the recording of the webinar. And I would like to thank all the attendees as well for participating. And a good night to you, Paul, in New Zealand, and a good day to everyone else.
Thank you.